Excellent. I was just looking a little bit surprised because I was very close to my camera, and I filled the screen with my face, which is always a bit off-putting. Yeah, I'm looking at the clock, and I think it's probably time to start. So yeah, hello. I'll start. Let me just find some slides with the normal administrivia stuff. And we'll make a start, which I think, if I get this right, yep. So hopefully, is that all? The only problem with Meet Echo is when you're presenting the slides, you can't see what everyone's doing in Meet Echo. So meanwhile, I'll start with the slides and then I'll hand over to Eve in a second. So hello, everyone. Session 1, day 2, Tuesday, IETF111 online again, so be it. Welcome to RAW. I hope you expect to be here. So this is a IETF meeting, despite the fact it being entirely remote, so it is therefore covered by the note well. If this is your first IETF meeting or you have never read the note well, I thoroughly recommend you do so. As this is an IETF meeting, you are agreeing that your representation can be recorded and all your participation is in the public. So if you have IPR considerations, you need to be very aware of it. I thoroughly recommend you read it. If you have any questions, there's lots of follow-on information. BCP 79 is the place to go first. So if you are unfamiliar with the note well, or this is news to you, go and read it before you step to the mic and make a mistake. This also covers codes of conduct, behavior, that sort of thing. The chairs should be completely au fait with it. So if you have an issue, of course, there's an ombuds team, but also you can approach the chairs and we can try and help where we can or forward it onto the ombuds team itself. So enough of that, but it's a serious topic to be considered. And this is a summary of the various detail of the note well on a second slide, so the font is big and you can read it. It should be noted that all these slides are available on the raw data tracker in the meeting materials. I think you can also get a zip or a tarball of them all from the IETF 111 main meeting agenda page. So if you have slightly dodgy internet and you would like to just listen to the audio and click next in the slides or revisit them at a later date, they're all available for you. So help yourself. So this is the administrivia at the beginning of the session. We'll get to the agenda in a minute. So obviously we're in Meet Echo. I understand there are also people who may be on the audio stream or on Jabber as well, but the main audio-visual content is being done through Meet Echo. If you haven't managed to connect, the link is on the screen now, but there is also a link from the IETF 111 main agenda page. The good news is it automatically does blue sheets, so we don't have to pass pens and paper around the room. Minutes. So there is an integrated Markdown-based editing tool, which we'd like to use for the minutes. It's collaborative, so we can all edit at the same time, but I would be really pleased if somebody would really start to bang some minutes into there, which we can try and capture, and they'll be published after the meeting. I recommend everyone to double check those minutes, particularly after they've made a statement at the mic or presented, just to check whoever was taking some notes at that point got their name spelt correctly, because we all know how we spell our own names, so we say it quickly and move on, but the poor person trying to capture it in text often just has a guess, and it's kind of useful to go back and check your names right. As I mentioned before, there's also a Jabber a Jabber room is what they call it. So that's an XMPP URL. So if you don't have access to Meet Echo for some reason, you can use Jabber. The main work of all the IETF working groups, and that includes RAW, is performed on the mailing list, because that gives us a permanent record of the discussions and God forbid, arguments that occur as we try and do our work. So long questions, something for people to really mull over and cogitate and then respond in slow time. The mailing list is the perfect place to do it. If you are not subscribed to the mailing list and you are interested in engaging with RAW, please subscribe. It's the way you get access to the conversation that's ongoing. And that's raw@ietf.org. The link's on the page here, but it's fairly easy to guess. Equally, if you have a message for the chairs, you can do raw-chairs@ietf.org, and that will go to Eve and myself, and also to the AD. And so if you've got admin issues or other troubles, let us know. We're here to help. That's our role in this whole thing. And as I mentioned earlier, the slide packs and various bits and pieces are available on the data tracker for this session, and the URL's at the bottom of the screen now. Eve, if there's anyone in the queue, I obviously can't see them because I'm now looking at the slides, not the screen. So shout and
no one in the queue.
Brilliant.
And in fact, I just wanted to note that with this version of MeetEcho, you can see all of the materials by going to the file icon at the very top of the screen, and it will take you over to the data tracker. So you can click on things as we go along as well.
Quick question, Eve. Either your mic is quite low or my total audio is quite low.
Do you want to how's that? Is that a little better?
Yeah, that is a little better. Thank you. I don't know whether anyone else was struggling or whether it was me. Difficult to work out whether it's in my end or not. Okay, so our agenda is fairly light, although it is filling up. But that's good because that gives us plenty of opportunity to actually discuss things rather than telling people that, rather than the time schedule slipping and the people at the end of the meeting having their time cut short, we do actually have time to discuss things and ask questions. So this is the intro. I'm covering the administrivia. Next up is about some of the related work, and then we'll cover some of the document status and some of the work even I've done with milestones. And then we'll go straight into presentations from various people about mostly the status of documents at the moment. And then Eve has a little presentation she's put together where she and I and the DetNet co-chairs get together every so often. And this was one of the topics of discussion between the four of us that we thought was probably worth opening up to the group to see what the working group thought. And it's an opinion gathering thing, but I'll let Eve cover that in a lot more detail when it gets to her. So yeah, over to you, Eve. This is where I stop speaking, and you can take over.
Okay, and let me know, how's the mic volume now?
Great. Okay. Shout next slide when you want it.
Okay, well, this is a fairly simple slide because we just wanted to let people know that because of the nature of this work, because we're working in the wireless domain, naturally there's this natural relationship with layer 2 and with obviously IEEE 802 kinds of developments. And there is actually within the IETF a coordination effort that's run by the IAB and its counterpart in the IEEE 802 arena. And you can read more about that coordination, which are, I believe, quarterly meetings that happen. Or maybe it's 3 times a year to match the IETF, but we have now begun to be invited to those discussions. Nothing momentous has happened as yet, except that the activities that are going on here are being tracked. And so it's the perfect kind of forum to raise issues and concerns about the interactions between technologies that the IETF is responsible for and technologies that the IEEE are responsible for in terms of, these are the specification writing organizations across those layers, across that interface. So this is simply to say we are now participating in those, as are the DetNet co-chairs as well. And another activity that launched back in April, for those of you who may not know about the Avenue Alliance, it is an organization that is responsible for certifying TSN, TSN implementations. And interestingly, during their plenary, there was a discussion that was held about whether it might make good sense to launch a DetNet study group. And with the intent of understanding how all these pieces fit together at the various layers, DetNet over TSN, DetNet not over TSN, et cetera, and then how RAW fits in. And in fact, AVNU has a wireless TSN study group as well. So this is merely to say that this activity was certified by the AVNU Alliance Board, and it will probably launch sometime in the next few months. We wanted everybody here, and we know that many of our DetNet colleagues are also here, so we wanted everyone to hear about it. And I think this will also get some airtime in the DetNet working group as well. Next slide. We have quite a few documents that are wending their way through the system. We're really excited to share that the LDAX document, we recommended it for IESG review. It's been about 40 days, unfortunately, that it's been in the queue for discussion. So we would definitely invite John to maybe comment on the status of it if he has an update to that.
My update is that my queue, for various reasons, has gotten woefully behind. I'm acutely aware of it and promise to do better in the near future. So yeah, I was just reviewing my queue and seeing that that particular document is waiting for me. So mea culpa.
Well, at least you're aware of it. We know you're aware of it. This is good.
Yeah.
And the next step, for clarification, the next step is to assign it to a meeting. Is that what happens next?
John, do you review it first and then it goes for a telechat?
Sorry, could you, was that directed to me? I clicked to mute myself and there's this unfortunate Meet Echo pathology where when you mute yourself, you lose audio for a couple seconds.
Oh, we were just asking you about next step. Is the next step that you review it and then it goes to a potentially for discussion at a meeting? What happens next?
Yeah, that's right. So I will review it. You haven't already gotten a writing area review for it, have you, by any chance?
No, we haven't.
Okay, so I will also kick it off for a writing area review, and then subsequently we'll put it on the agenda for an IESG meeting, and then you'll get to enjoy all the other IESG members' reviews.
Which are always thorough and welcome, I think is the polite phrase.
Yeah, actually, they are. Terrific. Thank you for that update, John.
You're welcome.
Let's see. So we have a couple of new working group documents. The use cases and technologies documents. No, actually, those have been working group documents. Our new ones, newly adopted, are the OAM documents and the architecture documents. And we are also heavily considering the I guess it's industrial requirements document as well for adoption. And so that is something that we should, when we get to the discussion in the agenda about the general use cases document, that one of the updates to it was referenced to the more detailed industrial requirements doc. And so why don't we defer that discussion there until that point about putting that document up for working group adoption. And it was our intent, and I think we mentioned it on the mailing list, that we expect to make some sort of formal appeal to the working group shortly after this meeting.
Yeah, so the authors expressed interest in working group adoption. There was some question about overlap with the use cases in general. There was some discussion at the last IETF about a problem statement document or whether we were just making work for ourselves. So yeah, I agree. I think that might be worth a little bit of discussion time at the end.
Okay. Next page. Oh, and of course, there's also percolating through the system are several documents regarding MEC as well.
Milestones. So yeah, so even I thought we would be good chairs and try and keep the the milestones on the data tracker in line with what we're actually doing, because of course milestones are dutifully put in when a working group forms, because they're an important thing to go with the charter and to try and scope our progress. But of course, often beyond the starting of the working group and over the next subsequent years, they just kind of get left and no longer bear any resemblance to reality. So we thought we'd be good, and so we have updated the existing milestones to actually reflect the work we're doing. So we're a little bit behind, but we have added some extra documents, and I don't think anyone needs a slap on the wrist about this. We are making progress and we are producing documents. So this sort of captures which milestones we're successful with, the dates have been aligned with what actually happened. So the green ones are accurate dates, the red ones are still aspirational.
Oh, and the green ones are, some of them are new, and I see that Pascal is in the queue. Go ahead, Pascal.
Well, just to say that maybe you've been pessimistic with the technologies document. I'll be presenting today, and you will see that it's very, very stable, and I was ready to ask for a workgroup last call, meaning that hopefully we'll submit to ISG, maybe a little late, but not that late.
Okay.
Great, that's really good news. What we didn't want to do is preempt the primary authors on some of these working group documents by saying, oh, we as chairs think it's ready, so we're just updating milestones to say we must submit it now. So great to have feedback from the author teams of these documents, and we'll let them drive let them and the working group drive the actual delivery date, so to speak. So great, that's really good news.
Just to clarify the visuals, the things in green are things that were not actually in the milestones as they existed in the past. The red, of course, is this a little bit of slippage, and the check marks mean that these are things that have been done, and you can see the replacement of various wordings, and so forth. But that's how you should read this visually.
So the reality is the target audience for this isn't really the working group, it's more for the ADs and the rest of the routing area to look in and say, oh, great, RAW is doing stuff according to its schedule. So there we go. So perhaps that's a bit of admin rather than anything else.
But it's important to acknowledge that John did recently become our new AD, and this was sort of a hats off to him to help him understand what we're doing.
So, yeah, look at that. A little bit over time, but I think we should probably crack straight on with the presentations. So, as a general point of order, I have a copy of everybody's slides downloaded in my browser. Eve does as well. So quite happy to let you share your own screen, whoever's presenting, and let you drive your own slides. But if you're unsure about making the technology work or whatever, we're here as a backup. So I think first up we have Pascal talking about the technologies draft and the architecture draft. So Pascal, feel free to share if you want, or Eve or I can share and you can shout. Next slide, please. It's your choice.
It's going to be easier, if you don't mind.
No problem. So, Eve, do you want to present?
Oh, you'd like me to present? Sure. Let me grab this.
Pascal, you've got a bit of echo.
Okay. Can move the mic, but
1, 2, 3. That's better.
I moved the mic a little bit. Okay,
yeah,
so I guess we start with the technologies document, right? So what I wanted to say about it is, and we'll see, is that it's been mostly stable. The worst that can happen to it now is, next slide please, is that what we discussed is kind of obsolete and we need to revamp, just to talk about the next generation, for instance, .11ax has a lot of focus and now BE has progressed. So if we wait too long, we'll have to rewrite a lot of things to align to BE as opposed to AX. Apart from that, there was very little change in this document. We've discussed more the use of different frequencies, for instance, the 6 gig in Wi-Fi, and because of that, TACH was also aligned, and thank you, Chavi, for doing this. But most of the rest, Wi-Fi, 3GPP, LDAX, has been very stable pretty much since we adopted the document. Next slide, please. So I don't know. One thing we could be doing is publishing, and that's what I suggest we do. An alternate would be to see, okay, since we started this document 2 years ago, how much of this technology changed to a point that we need to rewrite the document. Maybe the authors could look at that as part of the workgroup last call, maybe say, oh, we need to update this. I don't know, just because technology has evolved. But I think content-wise, we're there. And yes, apart from modernization to the document, there's nothing much I can see we can add to this document. That's pretty much where I am. So we have a number of authors there. So if somebody wants to say something more that needs to be added to the doc, but as far as I'm concerned, we're there.
Go ahead, Rocco.
Regarding the raw technology draft, I have provided a number of comments on, I think, June 21st, some 5 weeks ago. What will happen to these comments? I haven't seen them addressed.
I don't remember your comments, so what might? Okay, so I looked up your name very rapidly, and I have an empty mail from you, completely empty, saying comments on section 4. And it's, yes, like I said, what I received is completely empty.
Yeah, I can see the same email to the list. So I think, Rocco, if you want to send it again, I'm not quite sure whether it was an attachment and it got stripped off, or not quite sure what happened there.
But
yeah, sure.
Do you think it has to be processed before workgroup last call, because maybe you want to change dramatically the document, or is it like something which can be part of the workgroup last call resolutions?
Yeah, I think it will be better before.
Okay, well, okay. Please resend. I mean,
sure.
We didn't get it.
Okay, so I'm quite happy to hold for last call until we receive Rocco's comments and the author team can have a look at it and see whether what the impact of addressing them is, and depending on the outcome of that, we can go for a last call at that point. It doesn't immediately have to have last call now, but absolutely noted, Pascal, that apart from these comments, you think it's ready. So I think we can probably move fairly quickly on this unless somebody else has comments, but thank you.
Okay, so I guess we can move on to the architecture framework document.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Yves. Okay, so I have more to say on this one. Next slide, please. So first thing is, compared to the classical SDN model, where the PC, the controller, basically pushes some routes, and the network just obeys and forwards the packets along the path that is indicated by the PCE. RAW, basically the core of RAW is to turn that into a NUDA loop, where we observe, and that's the role of BFD, OAM, etc. Then we can leverage the wisdom from the PCE that built this complex track or something within the network to orient the new routing decision. Then the new PSC that we are putting together as part of RAW make this new routing decision of which subset of this graph is going to be used for the next packets. And then the PSC acts, and acting basically means deploying the pareo function across this graph that we call a track to basically use the selected subset of this graph. This pareo activity takes place at the DetNet service layer. So we need basically some control information to steer across the network this pareo activity. So for now, the document is pretty rich on the PSC. It was rich for a while now. What we've done recently is we have improved the OAM section. So we have also described what the pareo activity is. What is missing throughout is more precision on I would say, the type of exchange, type of messages, type of data that is propagated, made available at the different places to obtain the expected result. For instance, in OAM, there are multiple forms of OAM. With the improvement that we placed, we are saying, hey, you can do this, what we call reverse OAM in the document. And Greg now has proposed another term, which is upstream, so we'll discuss that. So we have this upstream OAM, but we still don't know which data, which formats is going to be captured along the way. For instance, it could be something that we learn from DLIP that's on the table. Well, this needs to be refined. Same thing in the orient step, which is the PC at work. We have not really expressed what kind of wisdom. No, please, yeah. For instance, the statistics about the quality of the links, etc. The PC will pass to the PSC to help the PSC make its future decision. And for the action, the pareo, there are different models, as I write down here. There is one model where the PSC is on the ingress only. So it has to basically make every decision of what's going to happen all along the path that's followed by the packet. And so everything must be placed in the packet. So that's one way of doing things. At least all the information of this guy will replicate, this guy will absorb, etc. There is a way to do things in a partially distributed fashion, meaning the PSC may hint some information, some goals, like what kind of quality is needed on the rest of the way, and then the node on the path to achieve that quality may decide to do a replication, for instance. So that's halfway. And now the PSC can also be fully distributed, meaning it's in every node. And just based on the reverse OAM, the upstream OAM coming from the rest of the way, the PSC at every hop knows the rest of the way and makes its own decision. So we have those three models, but we have not really described the type of data and the type of logic that will be used to achieve those models. In particular, when we signal things in the packet, we have words which say, hey, we could use beer or we could use SRv6, but we did not go much farther than that. So I don't know how far we want to go, but that's all we have.
Oh, MBLS. So I see Balash is in the queue. I think I pronounced your name right. I hope I did. So do you want to take questions now, Pascal, or at the end?
Oh, yeah, please. We have 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. First, I would have a question for clarification. So there is a dedicated OAM document in RAW. And now the RAW architecture document also starts to speak about OAM functionalities. So how OAM will be covered? So it will be covered in two documents. It will be in the architecture that refer to the dedicated OAM document. So how this discussion, how these OAM functionalities will be described?
So we are working, a good point, Balash. We are working very closely between the architecture, the raw OAM and the .NET OAM documents. And we are trying, and it's an everyday sync work. We are trying to get them in sync. Basically, the architecture needs to give the overall structure of things that the OAM document will have to follow. Like, we'll support this, we'll support that. For instance, the need for upstream comes from the architecture. It's describing the architecture at a high level, and then the OAM, the raw OAM document will have to describe in more details how that works. So that's how we position. We need to position OAM in this OODA loop to explain what role it plays and what kind of messaging can happen, but without going too much in the details. The details will come from the raw document or even the .NET document for everything that's common.
So, Pascal, I would understand that as the raw architecture document places requirements on the OAM document. So the raw architecture says, we need OAM to provide us this sort of information, and this is how we will act upon it. And the OAM document starts to drill into that. Am I correct?
Yes, but it's a bit more than that. We have to specify what kind of flows. For instance, the very concept of upstream OAM it has to be described in the architecture. It has to explain, hey, there is this packet coming from H on the right, back to the source, flooded across the graph to learn everything that is to learn and bring it back to the source. That's architecture. And then exactly the format of this message, the content of this message, etc., the details go to the OAM document.
Yeah.
But the fact that it exists, the fact that it flies from right to left against the current, this is architecture.
Okay.
Does that help, Balázs? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the clarification. I think that's good. I have also another question for clarification. So on this slide, I see .NET Service layer and .NET Service plane. So what does it mean? Is it the .NET Service sublayer, what you mean here, or is it something different?
No, that's it. So call it layer or sublayer. I mean, the sublayer is still a layer, but I mean, yes, it's the .NET Service layer. It's the thing where replication elimination happens. In our case, we are extending it a little bit because Pareo has things which are not listed in the .NET architecture, for instance, ARQ. And there will be more. My next bullet is about the things that we may need to add, either us or .NET in its next step. So,
maybe it would be better to use explicitly the .NET terminology. For me, it was somewhat confusing whether you are introducing some new term, which is absolutely fine, but I was not aware whether it is the service sublayer, what you mean here, and the functionalities what that service sublayer is providing you intend to extend.
Yeah, so I can do sublayer if you want to be picky.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead, Lou.
Yeah, Lou, please.
Okay, this is a different topic. I was going to bring this up on the next slide, but since you took questions on this one, it's a good place to show it. Pascal is taking an approach to shame me to provide my comments that I've said a few times to the author list. So I do promise to provide the text where we add in the ability to do multi-layer integration as opposed, or multi-layer approach as opposed to this integrated approach where both the radio layer or the raw layer and the .NET layer are fully integrated. And we've said we want the architecture to allow for both, and I said I'd provide some text that'll include some things, including DLEP, which is on the next slide. That was all I was going to say.
Yeah, that's much expected, Lou. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And also, you had some issues here and there that you said when you get the pen, you're gonna edit. So I mean, yes, just let me know when you want the ball, and I will leave you the document free for some time so you can do the changes and propose them and whatever, and then we'll decide exactly how we do the integration. I mean, it's in GitHub anyway. So just let me know when you want the ball and the virtual ball, and I will.
Well, that's how GitHub. We can just pull it and do the changes and then integrate. So I'll coordinate with you there, but thank you.
Okay, and then functions that we present in the raw architecture can be seen as an enrichment of .NET as being worked on the wire. And there are a number of examples of that. So Pareo with the ARQ and the overhearing and all those functions is an extension to pre-auth, obviously. There is the discussion about inserting timing information in the packet. As we said, the PSC is responsible for deciding which path the packet takes or subtrack. It's also possibly responsible of deciding when the packet will cross every hop on the way. Maybe providing some window of time or whatever, and how this is signaled is yet to be defined, but if we decide to support it, it has to be described in the architecture. And there was this work by Yakov about, for instance, providing some information about pretty much when each hop should be complete. And that's one way of achieving this. So not only would we signal which hop this packet is following and which subtrack, but also when those hops have to be achieved. So that's one thing that we could discuss. Another one is SR-based, so segment routing-based or BRT-based hints and control that I just discussed from the PSC to enable the decision by intermediate node to make replication elimination, for instance. So what will we put in the packets? And that's, again, an architecture decision that we have to take here. And like I said, there are some components which are available on the table, like SRv6 with or without extensions to what exists, or BRT, same with or without extension. There are things that can be done. Next slide, please. So some of you already read that slide, and yes, at that point for Lou. So you said it before I could. So progress of documents. So yes, we worked quite a bit on it, in particular for the OAM, but not only. So there were 3 bumps. So we went from 6 to 9 since last IETF.
Pascal, can I just make a clarifying statement? Not working group last call, working group adoption.
Oops. Okay.
That's fine. I just thought it was useful for everyone else. This is not in last call.
My fingers, hoping too loud. No, we're not there. So yes, the new work, you find the abstract was kind of obsolete, it's been reworked. I go in details about the terminology because you can't talk intelligently between people if we don't share a terminology. It can go anywhere. So we needed terminology and we worked a lot on it. Then there was all this discussion about, OAM, and as Padesh said, there is what fits in this document and what fits in the other documents. But keeping them in sync and actually distributed over not 2, but 3 documents because there is the raw and there is the .NET OAM. And then you'll see, and we have to define terms for that, that we have new OAM methods that will apply. There is this 2-step discussion, this 2-step technique, and then there is the reverse OAM, or maybe upstream if we have to agree on how we call it. Now, what's missing, as we said, there is all this discussion of cross-layer and delete, which is normally lower layer. How that's fed into probably the reverse OAM and how that's abstracted and returned to the PSC, which makes this warning decision. How we integrate timing information and encode it. How we express the multipath. Shall that be SRv6 extensions? Shall that be BRT? We have to describe that in more details. And maybe there is something else. I mean, if somebody sees like we're missing a section. But basically, the overall structure is we have this OODA loop that I just described on the previous slide, and we want to provide every component for that OODA loop. That's pretty much this architecture and framework document. Yeah, so do steps of observe, orient, decide and act. Next slide. So now goes the terms, and how much time do I have, just please? How much time left do I have?
Sorry, I was on mute. You're a little bit over, but I'm willing to let it run long because we have we have some time in this session. So keep going. This is important work, I think. So.
Okay. So the first thing that for which we needed terms was what I call differentiating the pipe from the water. In some document and work groups, and sometimes even in the DetNet discussions, there is this term path and there is this term flow. And the term flow can be used to represent an application flow, or it can be used to represent some abstract aggregate of data which has to follow the same treatment. We care about the treatment. We don't really care about what goes into this pipe. So the goal of those two terms here is to differentiate the flow, which is really something which belongs to the application and can be found, by the 6 tuple, for instance. Maybe it even takes DPI to find really what this flow is. But we don't really care if you look at the DetNet architecture, what it says is basically you take the flow or the flows and then you place them over a path. And the path is this track, this subtrack, that's the sequence of nodes and treatment that have to be followed to get from ingress to egress. And that's what we care about. We want to place the packets that match whatever flow or OAM, whatever policies there are, onto a path, tag that, and then that's the only thing that's used for forwarding. So we need to place in the packets what we need, but we don't want to have to do DPI or 6 tuple at every hop. One big reason for differentiating the path from the water is you might put different temperatures of water or even different fluids in this pipe, like OAM and application flows. You want them to follow the same, to receive the same treatment, because you care about the treatment, not what is being treated. And so signaling the track is really what we are about. Blah, blah, blah. So in the definition, we take DetNet terms, and I won't read that, but please take the time to read what's in green here. Basically, we provide the properties of what we call a track. And you'll find in particular that the track is reversible, meaning that you can send the packet over the reverse track while you inverse basically every link. And that's usable, for instance, to send OAM from egress to ingress to inform every node on the way about the shape of the rest of the way. And so we can express the track as a graph, with vertices, which are the relays, so the service sublayer nodes, and the edges being sequences of nodes which just do forwarding. So they're just transit nodes. Next slide, please. Okay, so we introduced the term subtrack. A subtrack is a track, but the subtrack will be used to refer to what the PSC has selected for this packet, and that's a subset of the track that was designed by the PCE. So the PSC is really there to make a decision of a subtrack of the track per packet or per group of packets. We have also the term segment, which basically refers to so an edge, and it's really a sequence of nodes. A track is a complex graph. It can be a direct acyclic graph, but it can even be not really acyclic. You'll see that there is this concept that east-west segments are oriented left to right, so from ingress to egress. But there's also north-south segments, and this one can be used in either direction. And if you look at Fig 1 in the DetNet architecture, you will see exactly that. You have north-south segments, which can be used for replication elimination in both directions. So it results that the track is not really a direct acyclic graph, but for a given packet, what it will follow will be a direct acyclic graph, because if it goes across north-south segment, a given copy cannot go back. An alternate copy of the same packet could go the other direction, but a given copy cannot go back. And then we have this concept of flapping, which is useful because, in wireless, you can lose your link for split seconds, and that comes back, and that happens all the time. And that's pretty much one of the justifications why we need to do a pareo inside the network as opposed to just live. Next slide, please. Okay, so we need the term OAM, and certainly we don't want to reinvent it. So we basically refer to 6281 as defined as the reference for what OAM means. We just remind it a little bit, but basically what we say is 6291 as precedence for defining the track, and what OAM observes in the case of RAW is a limited domain, that domain being the track. And it's not the subtrack, it's really the track. So for the pieces of the track that are not being traversed by traffic at this time, that's when we need active OAM, which is stimulated OAM that has to be injected in the track, even on portions which are not being traversed by traffic. Now, we also need to make the difference between in-band and out-of-band OAM. In-band being following the traffic with the exact same treatment, whereas out-of-band can take another path, possibly the reverse direction. Next slide, please. Possibly the reverse direction, and that's when we really create this new piece of work in the OAM domain that seems to be mostly ours for the time being. One function that we call limited OAM, and then again, think that those two terms, limited OAM and reverse OAM, are brand new. We need to agree on them. There is already an alternate proposal for reverse OAM, which would be upstream OAM, to really indicate that it goes against the current. So please feel free to, on the mailing list or what, to discuss proposal for alternate names. The limited OAM basically says we're going to observe not the whole track, but not even a subtrack, but a given function on one node or just a few nodes. For instance, just between this replication node and this elimination node, or just around this replication node by injecting a packet into the replication function and observing that the packet has been replicated in due time, at the egress. So just observing the replication inside this node. That's what we call limited as opposed to end-to-end. And the reverse OAM, as I hinted a number of times, is a collection of information that happens on the reverse direction. So basically, the idea is you start collecting, so that's when the two-step operation is handy. So you have a first step which basically signals, hey, let's start the collection. And so the nodes forward the packets and learn, for instance, through DLEAP, how that goes. And then the second step is the packet coming the reverse direction from egress to ingress, capturing all the measurements, taking a picture, if you like, of the graph with the measurements that were recorded to bring that back on the reverse path, meaning that each node which is being traversed by this OAM information can also learn the shape of the rest of the way. Based on that, you can do fully distributed PSC if you like to, or this arrives at the ingress, which now has information about the whole topology. Next slide. Oh, Rick, question.
Thanks, Pascal. Sorry, chair hat off. Just a clarifying question about flows and tracks. Are you intending to reuse the work in DetNet that assigns flows to tracks? So my concern is always that an ingress node spots a flow, it maps it to a track, starts to send it down that track, but an intermediate node makes its own classification and suddenly switches it across to a different track.
No, that would not happen, right? I mean, once the packet is assigned to a track, it has to follow that track to the...
But that track management, we're going to lean on DetNet and the DetNet technologies rather than inventing extra do we think there is extra requirements that RAW has beyond the facilities that DetNet provides with DetNet over IP, DetNet over MPLS, and the various encapsulations?
Well, it could happen. It depends on how far DetNet goes. So for now, there are two things, right? The current DetNet data plane basically forwards based on flows, meaning that it effectively reads the 6 tuple. So effectively, we don't want that. I've been pushing some new work based on hop by hop. It could be done otherwise. I think there is some work by Shusang at 6man, which uses SR v6, and agnostic. Either could work. To basically.
Yeah, so yeah, are you familiar that I spotted that there's a reasonably new working group called application-centric networking that is looking at adding IPv6 header option fields, option headers, let me get my terminology right, to tag flows from they want to say as an application perspective, but it's an extended DSCP marking effectively.
Yeah, so there could be some overlap, and that's a very good point, Rick, because there could be some overlap. We are basically doing the same thing. It's just that they are looking at it in terms of course, we're looking at it in terms of DetNet, but maybe, I don't know, we need to sync with them. I tried to sync with the work at Spring for replication elimination, and so far, and Balash was there, and Greg, and so far, it seems that it's more like, okay, everybody will do its work on this. Even if it looks like from a distance like the same thing, it might very well be that there is too much difference, and then we need to do it on our sides. We have to make that same work and
because my concern is the flow classification workload. If that has to happen at every node along a track, that's
whole point,
adding overhead.
No, the whole point is that it's an ingress policy. So that's why SR looks like a good client. Even if you don't see the SR signaling and we do hop by hop, the SR thinking of classifying the flows, assigning them to subtracks, to tracks actually, and then forwarding based on the track information as opposed to flow information, that's critical because you want to merge OAM with that. And you want to aggregate flows and all those things. And that can happen anywhere in the network. And I see Balash is also.
Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Balash.
No, sorry, Rick, just to finish. If we can reduce signaling that is done at 6man or at DetNet or wherever, and that saves some RFCs, I mean, that's good. We provide the architecture and the missing components, but whatever can be converged with DetNet and done at DetNet, I mean, we've been doing that for AM already. That's the best possible.
So chair hat on, I completely agree. I don't think inventing yet another method of doing this is a sensible idea. I think we're burning cycles there, and I'd rather lean on the work that's happening in other working groups.
But sadly, the Spring work for pre-auth doesn't seem to converge with DetNet in general, and so with us, it's going to be difficult as well. But we'll see, right? We'll see where they go. And if there's a way to use what they did, because it makes a lot of sense as I read it, then why not? But let's them do their stuff, without trying to please everybody, and let's see if we can derive what we need from their work. The architecture puts all those things together. Okay.
I agree. So, go ahead, Balash.
Okay, so regarding the OEM, I think it would be very essential for the next step to really define the requirements for RAW regarding OEM. And that should be the first step in my understanding. And this is what we have started also to clean up in the DetNet OEM framework to list explicitly the DetNet specific OEM requirement. And I think if the same is done for RAW, then we can compare whether there are any gaps or anything else to be added.
That's exactly where we are, Balash. We are very much in here.
Yeah. Okay.
Basically, the only thing which I may disagree, but it's a wording game, is when you say anything specific to .NET, the architecture must say what we use, not just what is specific to us. What we use, everything we use. And if it's specific to us, then we'll have requirement to define to do the RFCs. If it's not specific to us, then we'll just point on the RFC that do it. But the architecture must say we are doing this or this or this. So it's not just what's specific. Now, obviously, the raw specifications, not the architecture, but the specification will specify what's new. So that's where your words fit. But what globally, the framework, everything we can use, has to be described in this document.
Okay.
Okay. That's my last slide. Sorry.
Brilliant. So I was about to say, Pascal, you're 5 minutes over, but this is.
Yeah, last slide. I just wanted to point out that there is opinionated text that I wrote as a challenge to see how people think and get them to kind of react. And that text probably will change, but that text says that the best method for the PSC to make its forwarding decision, so to act, based on the two O's, the observation by OAM and basically the wisdom by the PCE. The best suited OAM to do that is the reverse OAM, where you know at each point of time the quality of the rest of the way. And the two-step approach to trigger the capture and then capture the result is the best, quote unquote, the expected approach. So this goes into Balazs's direction, where we say that's what we do. I don't want to say that's the only thing we do, right? I just say it's the best suited. That's what we would hope to do. But if there are alternate OAM methods which can be as useful, that text must change. But at least I wanted to trigger discussion and get people to say, oh, that might be true, or there is also this thing, or that's completely wrong.
So Pascal, my immediate comment would be reverse OAM has one problem, and that is the latency on the information. So the feedback is delayed because it is the return path is gathering that data as it flows back. So you're reacting on slightly out of date data. That would be the downside of reverse.
But it's much less outdated than what the PCE sees. So in terms of scale, we've made a big step. And then if you don't know the rest of the way, and you make a decision just on the next hop, maybe the hop after that is completely broken. So you really need the rest of the way.
If this was easier, they'd have solved it.
It's delayed. Delayed. Now the frequency at which we capture that has to be tailored, and I guess the architecture should have words on that. I wrote them on some mailing list. I think it's that Spring. I'm not sure that and Spring, but there are a number of reasons to tune the reverse OAM periodicity, or when you do it and how often, etc. It really depends on how many packets you can lose in a row, how much redundancy you have to cover anyway. There are tons of reasons to tune. That's going to be hard.
So Greg, did you have a comment, or have you changed your mind? Go ahead, Greg.
You brought very interesting perspective of that collecting aggregated metric and reverse might be viewed as a aggregated metric incurs their delay. And that's something that we can discuss and bring to attention to the operator, because there is a trade-off. So if operator wants to aggregate the metric, so to reduce the number of injected packets that provide the feedback, then that will increase this latency. So then their information will not be instantaneous.
I completely
And
agree.
I agree with you. It's important to point it out.
Because
the need for instantaneous grows with the lower level of redundancy. The more redundancy you have, the less you have to be very precise in how you use it, right? So basically, there is a balance here of the cost of all this OAM in the one hand, which is spectrum, and the spectrum you can save by not using the full track.
Yeah. But
so
again, I think that it's an important point that very specific for RAW, and we'll need to express it in the document.
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed. So this is a great conversation. Let's take it to the list. I'm watching the time, and we're eating into other people's presentations. If there's time at the end, we can pick it up in the extra question time we've got at the end. Meanwhile, go ahead, Carlos. You over to you.
Okay, you can hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks a lot. And this is about the raw use cases. I'll be probably briefer or shorter than the 20-minute slot, so we will catch up a bit. So this is a presentation on behalf of the set of co-authors that is listed there. I will first just basically summarize again the use cases that we have covered in the draft. I will not go into the details because we have covered this in previous meetings, but just to keep the context. So we have different use cases described in the document: aeronautical communications, amusement parks, wireless for industrial applications, pro audio and video, wireless gaming, UAV and V2V platooning and control, edge robotics control, and emergencies, instrumented emergency vehicle. And for each of these use cases, the structure in the draft that hasn't been changed for some time already is first we start with the use case description, high level, then we go into the specifics that are relevant for RAW, the challenges that these use cases poses to the reliability, availability in wireless heterogeneous networks, why these use cases need wireless instead of a wire solution, and then we go into try to extract some of the specific requirements that use cases poses for RAW technology. This is the use case structure per each of the use cases that we have in the document. That has not changed in a while. And basically, I wanted to use this presentation slot for, on the one hand, basically take what we agreed or discussed in the last IETF meeting as next steps, see what we have done, see what is pending, and then make some questions to the working group to make, basically to structure the next steps and the progress to make the document get to the publication. So in terms of next steps that we agreed in IETF 110, basically we always request input for the working group. That feedback is always very valuable. In terms of the structure, the use cases that we cover, are they relevant, are they not? Do we need to merge? Do we need to add some use case that is missing? Do we need to update anything because some of the requirements has changed? This type of feedback is always very much welcome. And we, honestly, I think we are missing a bit of this input to make the document good enough to get to the final stage. Then we also agreed to collaborate and align with their architecture document. This we did it. We had some conversation with Pascal, and we ensure that we align on the terminology. These changes that Pascal just summarized on the tracks, subtracks, segment, all these kind of things. The use of flow path. We checked that in the use cases document is aligned and consistent with the architecture document. We also discussed about working towards including requirements, not only use cases. There was a milestone on requirements. Well, the document already has something on requirements. There is a question about that later to see what we do specifically on this. And then there was some discussion on the integration with the document on the specific requirements for industrial use case. There was some discussion on the mailing list. The consensus that I got was that either merging integrating was not a good idea, so the idea was to do some cross-reference. This is what we have at this point. In the use cases document, we make a reference to the draft Sophia raw industrial requirements. And I don't know if there will be additional discussion as mentioned by the chairs at some point in today's meeting, but this is what the raw use cases document has done regarding that point so far. Then the changes I made, well, I already summarized most of them. Check terminology for consistency, done. Add a reference, done. We also generalized the use of UAV, and instead of UAV, what we refer to vehicles in general, because platooning is not limited to UAVs. We have platooning in cars, with cars or trucks, vehicles in general. So we basically tried to generalize that section to not to be specific to UAVs. And we also added a summary section where we put some text about non-latency critical communications. And there's another question related to this in the next slide. So let me go directly into the questions, which is the main point of this presentation. So,
sorry, Carlos, can I quickly interrupt with a point of order?
Sure.
So,
Sure.
as you said on the last slide, you now have a reference through to the industrial requirements, which is obviously a personal draft. So this would be a good reason to adopt the industrial requirements as a working group document, because therefore we can have a proper reference between two working group documents. It's unusual otherwise. So just for the clarity of the working group. Carry on.
Okay, thanks. And I basically just to add that I fully agree with that adoption. Paul and I will be supportive of that adoption. So going back to the questions. So one point that came up in the discussion that we had with Pascal is about that RAW is not only about latency critical communications. So there is a component about or there are some use cases that are very much putting the focus into the reliability and availability, not being so critical the latency part. And there are some examples there, wireless gaming, UAV and B2B, platooning and control. Well, of course, the control, that depends on the scenario, but there are scenarios in platooning that you don't need a very low latency to make them work. So we believe that this non-latency critical communication part deserves some highlights or some additional explanation in the use cases document, to avoid the reader think that RAW is mainly about latency. And I think it's not only about latency. Latency is one part, but it's more about reliability and availability. So one question, this is open for the working group to decide, because it's a working group document, is whether we need to add a subsection in some or all the use cases where non-latency critical communication may be part of the use case about non-latency critical communications. So that will be section X.4.1 under X.4. And that's a question for the working group to provide feedback. And Rick, you have a comment?
Yeah, Rick, without my chair hat on. So I think having a section somewhere in the use cases saying non-latency critical communications, I think absolutely agree. Whether it needs to be .4.1 in every section is debatable, but I think concentrating on the reliability and availability as the key drivers rather than otherwise would be the latency critical applications over wireless law rather than raw. So absolutely support it. Don't know whether we need to cover it in every single 4.1.
Okay.
I would add to that. Oh, go ahead, Pascal.
Sure.
You go first, and then I'll hop in the queue behind you.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. And it's something that we've been hinting for a while. Certainly, we have use cases where delivery time is critical, but we also have a very important use case where we basically mostly protect the access. If you look at the architecture, there is one section just on that. And so RAW basically observes the quote-unquote least reliable hop, which is the first wireless hop, hoping that the rest of the way is wired, highly reliable, very fast, etc. And so since we don't do DetNet all the way, there is no way to guarantee latency. But if we can accept that most of the loss and the reliability and viability issues are on the wireless first hop, like Wi-Fi or 5G, and that the rest of the way is a lot more reliable, then yes, RAW applies, even if latency cannot be guaranteed.
Great point.
So just for that use case, it's exemplary of when we don't ensure latency.
And I wanted to heartily agree as well that this is important. And one of the things that you referenced in an earlier slide was about whether the list of use cases was complete enough. At least that's what you seem to imply. And I think that this could go a long way to help flesh out some of those additional use cases. If we sort of, I agree with Rick that we may not need something like a 4.1 for every single use case there. But going through the exercise of asking to see if we could find those use cases would be interesting. So for example, I was recently looking at the use cases from the DetNet document, and there's a really healthy body of work around utility use cases. And in that domain, there actually is this sort of, there are a set of applications where reliability is more interesting to that particular application than the latency. And so I was thinking in the wireless domain. So that was an example of where I thought, oh, maybe we should add something here in the use cases for DetNet, for RAW. So anyway, I'm heartily agreeing and would be interested to jump into that discussion.
Okay. Thanks, Eve. Thanks, Pascal and Rick, for the comments. I mean, I fully agree. This was just a question, so I don't have a strong opinion either. I mean, I'm not even pushing for this, just to trigger the discussion how we address this thing about adding the non-latency critical communication part into the draft. So let's try to have a discussion maybe on the mailing list on how do we is best to do it.
Is that your last slide, Carlos?
No.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, I have another question. That is the requirements part. So in some meeting, I think was the one before the last, there was a discussion whether this document should kind of adopt the requirements part of the original charter. So I have a question here, again, very open to the working group and especially maybe to the chairs. That is, we already have some requirements for RAW section in the document. So I don't know if we are still need to or are expected to develop this further, like maybe having a wrap-up section on requirements and putting, this language on summary language on requirements for RAW, which may be good in the sense of trying to be cleaner for the reader, but it will be a bit challenging because we have different use cases with different requirements, so it's a bit hard to generalize some of the requirements. So maybe it's sufficient as it is, but I just wanted to make that point just to see whether there is something that the working group expects this document to do that is maybe not yet done as expected.
So with chair hat on, I don't think we need to have a specific requirements document. As I understood, the consensus of the working group is the use cases document fulfills what we want out of a requirements document, particularly in light of the industrial requirements document existing. So if somebody wants to write another document which drills into autonomous vehicles and talk about specific autonomous vehicle requirements, that's fine. That's great, and we can take that on board. But I do like the idea of a summary. So,
okay.
And I think it's perfectly valid in that summary to say, yeah, and this doesn't apply to some of these use cases, but in general, there's a feel there, and as a summary rather than an absolute list, I think that has value.
Okay. Perfect.
That's my personal opinion there. But I would like to see a summary. I think it works well at the end of the document.
Okay, I was not implying or trying to suggest to do yet another document. I was trying to.
No.
Yeah, that for sure. I mean, I don't think that will be that helpful. But yeah, I'll try to do this wrap-up section, and then we can see whether it makes sense or not and decide whether to keep it or not.
Okay, thanks.
And then, well, the typical, or the usual next steps slide on whether asking for feedback. I'm always trying to get additional feedback on what you believe can be improved, removed, updated. And at some point in time, I would like to ask for maybe the chairs or someone, the chairs to ask as chairs for some good reviews of the document before we do working group last call. I believe that we need to get a couple, 2 or 3 good reviews before that step to ensure that the document has the quality it deserves.
Okay, you said chairs, so that's the cue. Would anyone like to volunteer to do a good, solid review on this, please? I will try and find some time to have a look at it myself, but yes, so Karina, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, yes, I can do a review.
That would be great. So in general to the working group, we think, Carlos thinks this document is pretty much done. Yes, a working group last call is probably on the cards. I think it's probably ready for that. Let's everyone in the working group, if you've got a spare couple of hours to have a proper read and review, that would be fantastic. I think what's blocking the working group last call is the alignment with the industrial requirements document. I think once we get that adopted, then I think we're and get some reviews in, I think we're good to go. I agree, but we'll take that offline and we'll.
It looks like there are a couple of others, both Adam and Xavier Villanozana, who have also offered on the chat to do reviews. So we can capture that.
That would be great. Yeah.
Okay, that's highly appreciated. And just one point, Rick. I do think that we need to go through this couple of points on the latency critical and on the requirements summary before we go to the working group last call. So
absolutely.
I would like to ask maybe the volunteers to let the authors add this, and then after that we have a new version. Please provide the reviews, and then depending on the outcome, we see whether we go for working group last call or not. That will be my take on that.
Okay, so from as one of the chairs, I suggest that you uprev the document to address those comments as you see fit. We get some review back from the people who've offered, which is very kind, and then when you're happy, we'll go to last call. I think that sounds like the way forward.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Carlos. It's a great document, by the way. So I'm desperately trying to find the agenda. So next up, we've got Fabrice with OAM. So Fabrice, do you want to? Yes. Oh, I was on another tab.
Great. I think it works. Yeah?
Yes.
So I may start to present the update we have done about the OAM document in complement with what presented Pascal previously. So that's just a diagram of the historical parts of the draft. Actually, it was created at the beginning with everything together. We first split the draft to collect everything which was specific to .NET in a more generic draft. And for the OAM raw draft, this is very focused on wireless networks. And since the working group adoption, we changed the version just copying. And we have enrolled an update in the terminology. We have also addressed the comments of Chavi. And we have also a question about bidirectional OAM, so what Pascal has called the reverse OAM. So basically, that's all the changes we made to the draft since the last meeting. So for the vocabulary, we changed a little bit some definitions. We have listed ideally the inbound, out of band, so everything to make a distinction between the OAM packets which are transmitted through the recesses which have been dedicated for data flows or not. We have also defined, thanks to Carlos for that, the type of links we may support in RAW. since we may have peer-to-peer links or also some links which are more complicated with one transmitter and several receivers. So we keep on only considering some links without collisions, but we may have several receivers for each of the transmission opportunity. And basically, we also remind that radio transmissions, that's a broadcast transmissions, so any node which is in the vicinity may receive it and may be able to decode it. So we now make a clear distinction between the characteristic of the networks and the constraints. So typically the battery lifetime. We also introduce a paragraph about the mobility because we have more and more mobile nodes, thanks to Carlos for that also. We are now properly defining the delay. That's the time between the generation of the packet and the reception. And more importantly, we make a distinction between the transmission delay, which is fixed. Actually, it depends on the bit rate, the radio bit rate, and the residence time in the queue, so that it depends on the scheduling, the number of retransmissions, because in radio networks, we may need that. So we may have some complex resonance time patterns, for instance, when using pre-off or this kind of stuff. Second update we have made, that's about the predictive maintenance. Since we are continuously changing the environment and the characteristics, we have to predict the evolution of the future. So that's the key to proactively detect when the anomalies or defects will overcome and will break the transmissions. For the fault tolerance, we are addressing the problem of multi-attachments. So we have multiple MIP for each hop. So this means that we may have a very large number of possibilities for the forwarding. And this is combinatorial. So at each hop, we are increasing the level of diversity. So that's quite changing to address. We also now describe clearly the information collections about information elements, the fact that we need probably hierarchical monitoring because the overhead will be too large because we have a large collection of metrics to collect because of the radio characteristics. And as a matter of fact, for some of the technologies we try to address, we have a very small bandwidth, so we cannot transmit everything that we would like to do. So we have to make a choice, and a hierarchical approach would be relevant in that situation. And the last part, which needs, I guess, is still a little bit to be modified, that's how to report the statistics that have to be collected back to the source. Actually, it comes from the fact that we may have multiple paths, so that's track. That's the concept of track when we have multiple possibilities of forwarding nodes. So we have a very large number of possible forwarders, and as a matter of fact, for the maintenance intermediate endpoint, we have multiple forwarders for each router. So that's very complicated. So we propose typically that we must support the individual polling. So each maintenance intermediate endpoint may be polled individually to report some statistics. So that's a requirement because that's easy to implement, but as a matter of fact, it will be very inefficient. So I guess that's probably a question, but we should also support a collection which is much more optimized. So that's the reverse OEM. When we get the information back to the source, we may be able to collect that easily and efficiently. And since that's not so straightforward, so I guess we need to discuss about this problem specifically. That's the only current weakness of a draft, to my mind. So next step, thanks first to Xavi for sending his comments that we have addressed on the mailing list. If other participants want to review, proofread the draft, share their critics, comments, they are very well welcome. We are in the direction, I guess, for our last call, just after having addressed the problem of reverse OEM, but I guess we are quite close from addressing this last point.
So thank you very much, Fabrice, and the whole author team for doing this work. It's vital and excellent. And thank you for the various commenters for providing feedback. I don't know what you think, Eve. This is a discussion in progress. I don't want this document to go to working group last call because I see a dependency on the raw architectures document. Based on the conversation we were having during Pascal's presentation, where the architecture document is placing demands on the OAM facilities of the network. I don't want to push this into working group last call just to find 6 months later that we needed to make an adjustment or make a demand, perhaps on the reverse OAM or something. I'm very happy for it to sit as the working group thinks this is pretty much done, but we're blocked on another document. I'm very happy with that. What do you think, Eve, and what does the group think?
I will say that while you were thinking about one kind of blockage for it in terms of the architecture document inside of RAW, I was thinking about the coordination with the DetNet OAM draft. And so I was thinking that they probably need to hold off until they go up in tandem, or that DetNet probably precedes this one, but maybe my assumptions are wrong. But that was my first response to your question, Rick. Fabrice, what do you think of those comments and other authors?
Okay, I think that yes, it makes sense to work to wait for the adoption of the architecture draft, because yes, we have a dependency between the two drafts, particularly for the reverse OAM. For the coordination with the DetNet OAM draft, I think this is less sensitive. We have worked a lot because we have some bi-weekly call with DetNet about this specific problem. So I guess now the drafts are not really interdependent to my mind. So I think this is less sensitive, and it will be even less sensitive if we postpone the working group last call after the architecture document.
Okay. So I think we've got a way forwards where I think we can pretend it's in last call, as in the authors think it's ready, it's been well reviewed. Don't let that stop any members of the working group doing another deep review on it. If they want to do that, that's fantastic and always welcome. So we'll sort of assume it's done, but hold it pending any radical changes driven by the evolution of the architecture document as that matures. I think that's the way forwards. Obviously, that puts pressure on the architecture document to make progress, because I don't want to just leave this in limbo forever. So sort of slightly putting pressure on the architecture and the working group as a whole to go and review the architecture document and help the architecture authors to get that document worked on, because architecture is, I think, our critical path now, and is actually the core work of RAW as I see it. So yeah, thank you very much, Fabrice. If nobody else wants to jump to the queue.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So quick glance at the agenda. So Eve, it's you, and we are 2 minutes ahead, which gives us a bit more time for discussion. On you go.
Okay. Oh, hang on. Right. Just going to hide this. Okay. As Rick introduced early on in the agenda, this is a conversation that pokes its head up every so often. And
sorry, you are quite quiet. Can you?
Oh, okay. How's this? I'm holding my mic closer to my mouth. Is this better?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, good. Okay, and I will use my New York voice and be loud. All right. So this is a topic that periodically I raise my hand as an irritant and say, shall we talk about interoperability? I know where so many of these documents, not only in RAW, but in DetNet, are in flight, but maybe we should have one of these early discussions to just seed people thinking about this, to cogitate about it, and to just have some discussion. So this is really a bit of a teaser discussion. And it comes about because this visual that I often go back to, which is a very rough DetNet raw timeline. It's something that is an estimate, of course. It doesn't include everything. The salient feature is the things in yellow are, as in on the DetNet line, you can see these are things that have become RFCs. The buttons in bright green are drafts that we have milestone estimates around, and then so I showed DetNet here, which seems to be marching along at a good cadence. The timeline, of course, comes way before this for when DetNet started, and no doubt it will proceed into the future beyond this. And RAW, you can see many of our documents are still in the ID phase. That's okay. We just launched about a year and a half ago. And then there's this IETF hackathons, which I think the hackathon started somewhere in the 80s, maybe the mid, not 80s, the IETF 85 or something like that, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But it's this idea of hackathons held jointly with the IETF is something that has evolved over the years. Obviously, it happens 3 times a year. And if we could imagine that we had specs that were mature and finished, what are the kinds of things that we might bring to an IETF hackathon? And is it time to start thinking about if and how we would use them to good end? Some of the aspirational kinds of demonstrations that I have here on the bottom follow the evolution of these broader discussions. Maybe we would begin with just purely DetNet, demonstrate why a layer 3 solution is interesting. It can cross subnets and provide scalability. What happens when we pair layer 3 determinism with layer 2, maybe in the form of something like TSN? What happens when we've got wired and wireless working with TSN? These are the kinds of things, and clearly this is aspirational because I'm showing this all on this timeline. It's not to scale. Those sorts of things are probably well into the future, go into 2022. But this is to put this out there. Now, I put this out there because when I look at DetNet, and not RAW so much, but when I look at DetNet, there's a pretty healthy body of RFCs that are completed for the foundational drafts, the data plane drafts, not drafts, but they're RFCs now. And there are, just a few more specs that might complete the suite of things that someone would use to implement a full DetNet implementation. And RAW, as you can see, is not quite there yet, but nonetheless. So the question that I really often come back to is, how might we use an IETF hackathon? Should we use an IETF hackathon as a venue for interoperability testing? And it used to be the case that hackathons happened, for a couple days over a weekend, and that's been growing steadily. And during COVID, the hackathons are week-long events, which is actually quite promising from the standpoint of when you have drafts that have complexities that are going to require some sophisticated sort of setup. That a longer period of time might be beneficial to them. So some of my teaser questions to you, and this is really, again, I don't have the answers to this, but I think about these kinds of questions and wanted to get a sense about how important these questions are to others who are in our virtual room here. One, is it time to queue up these kinds of discussions because we are having more mature sets of RFCs? And does the pop-up hackathon or plugfest offer us the right format for the kinds of testing we want to do, both in terms of the number of days that this kind of hackathon happens and the frequency with which we might want to be doing this interoperability testing. And admittedly, my fascination with this is when you get to the part around, well, what if we want to pair this with some TSN capabilities? How might a hackathon, could a hackathon facilitate those kinds of access to those kinds of capabilities? And do we need to think about more permanent underlying infrastructure in order to even have our hackathons or plugfests? And so one of the questions would be, might there also be a range of approaches to how we go about supporting hackathons and interoperability testing? Do we want to, in some sense, have a more permanent testing strategy? It's a little bit bold to call what we do a test bed, in the sense like it's not a permanent infrastructure, but maybe we want to create something more permanent. Maybe we want to borrow or partner with, or even invite others to come in and showcase the sorts of test beds they had for this sort of deterministic networking. And what kinds of collaborations do we want to think about fostering? We have quite a diverse and wonderful collection of participants across DEDNet and RAW and the broader IETF and IRTF. One of the things I really appreciate, I know I saw Karsten Borman on here earlier, who runs the Thing to Thing working group. I have enjoyed being an observer of how he conducts the hackathons, which is to partner pretty actively with our sister or adjacent standards bodies, like in the Thing to Thing research group case, W3C, as well as industrial, well, I guess you could call it an industrial forum, but a standards forum like 1DM, which is doing similar work. And so partnering across, formal standards bodies and informal forums to get the right mix of participants at these kinds of events. So I will open up the floor to see if there's, like, what do people think about thinking beyond that first collection of RFCs that might give us a hold on a full-bodied implementation of some of this work? Anyone in the queue? I can't see the screen, but I would also invite my co-chairs to to come to the mic and further elucidate some of these ideas.
Currently, there is nobody in the queue, but Karsten has added a. Oh no, Karsten has joined the queue. Great. Go ahead, Karsten.
I can quickly say what I was going to type. So indeed, using an organization like a research group or a working group, as long as you have it, is really a good way to bring together people from different organizations. And the hackathon is a very good milestone for that, because people prepare for that, then people have a week to bring things together and make them work together. So you, of course, have a slightly different technical environment for the hackathon. So in the Think to Think research group, we are often happy if we can get a packet from A to B. You probably need a little bit more support, and you might not be happy even with the wonderful new stuff that now is available for people who want to share networks from remote points during the hackathon. So that's probably something where you need to think about what the best setup is. But there are probably still so many things that can be done at a hackathon. I would heartily recommend pursuing that.
So I'll add my voice to the mix, because I've had this side conversation with Eve before. My one concern, I think, ties into what Karsten has said, which is when we're trying to do reliable protocols building on top of reliability capabilities at layer 2, using the network facilities available at a hackathon, short of bringing a very complicated set of equipment specifically for it, I think there's and I'm not a huge hackathon devotee. My concern is that building a rig where you can start to really validate what you're designing works, which is part of what a hackathon or a plugfest or an interoperability test is to validate that the protocols and architectures that we've spent our time working on do actually work, needs quite a complex rig when you're talking about not only wireless systems but determinism as well. And I wonder whether that's too big for an IETF hackathon, or whether there's something else that can be done, and I don't have the answers to these things, which is why I'm interested in other people's opinions. That's me completely hat off, by the way. Adam, go ahead.
Voice from Rick. It is quite a big undertaking for a hackathon. I've done it before in the Drip Working Group. We do wireless protocol. We were doing broadcast stuff. I had to bring stuff to Singapore with me, and it was a bit of a pain, to put it mildly. So I can understand that sentiment. It might be beneficial because, as Eve pointed out, we've been doing hackathons that are a week long now. It's hey, at 112 hackathon, let's, all do our things in our own corners and come together and set up and work together in interims to, figure out what kind of rigging we need, how do we want to set it up, et cetera, and then come on that week and do a week of testing.
Thanks, Adam. You make a very good point that around the planning, and that is something that definitely the chairs are here to assist with, so that if there's an understanding that, yeah, there's some willingness as we mature the technologies, of course, to attempt to do something at a hackathon, but it's going to need a lot of organization to try and get kit to wherever it needs to be, or connected in whatever distributed manner it currently exists. That's
and this is why I called this an early discussion, because I think it's complicated enough that it really is going to take some brainstorming and thinking about and planning and assessing whether maybe we need to do something slightly differently than a hackathon. But again, and it's because it's not at IETF 112 by any means, but maybe it's a year out. Not sure.
So, is there anyone with a counter to this? Say, does someone want to say, I don't see the point of this, we'll do it inside my corporation and we'll be happy with our product? It's quite a bold statement at an IETF, but it's a perfectly valid one. I mean, that might be the approach. We let companies or universities do it. Go on, Adam.
The kind of what you were just saying, Rick, is that a company will do it internally, they'll be happy with their product. It would be more of an exercise for them to just come and say, oh, is there going to be another company there? Let's see what happens when we put our two systems next to each other. What's going to explode?
And that is a very valid point. It's about the interoperability. It's because we're aiming for, layer 3 is about connecting the layer 2 technologies together and keeping that reliability across those heterogeneous layer 2s. Otherwise, we can all just go away and use TSN or 5G or whatever, and there's no point to this working group. So there has
actually, yeah. I do think that is where we got to, and why it is that I use the term showcase various testbed strategies, because companies are likely doing this within their own walls and creating their own test beds, but that perpetuates the problem that we have, which is that interoperability with oneself is boring and is really an interoperability test. And so maybe this is, becomes a place where we can entice others to share with us their strategies for doing testing. Maybe it would help us even evolve the kind of hackathons we support, or the borrowing of resources elsewhere. And there may be precedent for that within the hackathon community at IETF, but I don't know. And it's probably worth engaging some of the people who are more involved in the hackathons and have watched them evolve to ask exactly that question. Go ahead, Rick.
Can I add a clarifying point here? What I don't think we're proposing is any sort of formal verification. So we're not handing out badges to say this is IETF RAW approved technology. This is purely.
IETF doesn't do that. It doesn't
exactly.
do
certification. But I wanted to underline that at the mic. What we're talking about is validating the assumptions that have gone into the standards that we have produced to make sure that we haven't written nonsense. I'm pretty sure we haven't, but or we won't. But until you check it, you never really know. There's a couple of comments in Jabber. Are people being shy?
Just we're still talking. Yeah, I think that interop testing is a useful thing on its own. And when we built COAP at the start of last decade, we had several events that Etsy organized for us, where we actually brought together our implementations and went through a formal program of tests that we were doing. That didn't lead to a badge or anything. That was not the point. But the point was to really get at a high level of test coverage. So there was some assurance that what we were doing was understood by most of the people. And I think a hackathon is slightly less structured. So yeah, of course it needs planning. But I think you have more ability to react on the spot to weird things that are happening. And we actually, when we did ROC in the early 2000s, we had several meetings that we called interops, but really they were about finding problems where the specifications allowed different interpretations and so on, and resolving them on the spot, fixing the code on the spot, and carrying on. And that also was very, very useful. And that was much more like a hackathon, except that at a hackathon, you are not even expected to bring a fully complete implementation. So you can still write code while you are there. So I think that are the 3 points on the scale that you can try to look at. And a hackathon is really good for bringing in people who haven't quite fully committed yet. The interop we did for ROC is good for going through a large number of potential defects quickly. And the Etsy thing is good when you are essentially done and just need to make sure you have a good test coverage.
Great. That is fabulous feedback. And like I said, I really have enjoyed watching your strategies of drawing in the broader community inside of some of these other groups that you're leading, and do see that as a model for what we could be doing here.
Yeah,
there's interest. And again, this is not to say that we need to do any of this or that we're required to do any of this. This was really asking, do other people have interest and think it's important? So I thank everybody who's come to the mic.
I think we'll be continuing to lean on Carsten for inspiration and advice as this matures. I don't hear anyone objecting, but I understand several people are being quiet about this because there's obviously corporate interests, etc., etc. But thanks, Eve. I think that was worth asking, and we weren't expecting any concrete results from it, so which is great. So we have 11 minutes left in the session. On the agenda, this is marked as open mic, any other business. So this is really over to the floor. If anyone has anything they want to bring up or ask any clarifying questions they've just thought about on any of the presentations we've had or anything else RAW related, put your hand up, jump to the queue, and ask away. I've either muted you all or there's a...
I think it's a wrap.
I think it might be a wrap. Wow, we have finished
This was
early.
a great meeting.
So
love the amount of discussion and the detailed presentations.
Yes, likewise. Thank you very much. John, go ahead.
+1, great meeting. And it did my heart good to hear actual substantive discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and thank you. I like I can't say the word subs. I can't say it. That word. I like discussion with substance. I like discussion with substance. Otherwise, it's just presentations on drafts. This is what I did. It's a bit like presenting your homework. So thank you very much for bringing topics of conversation. And I think we finished 10 minutes early. If only there were cookies available for everyone, we could all rush out and eat them. But hopefully we will get a chance to meet in person at some point, COVID willing. But otherwise, thank you very much for your attendance and your presentations. And please review the drafts we've got in progress. All review is useful. Don't know if you want to add anything else, Eve, but otherwise I think we're done.
I think we're done. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.